What you're about to watch, in some cases, may be nothing more than an active imagination mixed with bits of internet hearsay, family grief, denial and media exaggeration. But in this programme, you'll also have the opportunity to look at bits of evidence supporting both sides of the argument of whether there is a serial killer or whether the deaths are just unfortunate accidents. But please be advised that there are scenes that some viewers may find upsetting and are of an adult nature. In 2015, I walked these canals alone at night looking for what some people believe to be a serial killer and whose victims are now claimed to be in the hundreds. This was followed up by a Channel 4 documentary and a video statement from the police claiming that there was no such person. However, it's now 2018 and bodies are still appearing in Manchester's waterways. So the question still remains: are these deaths accidents or are they the work of a serial killer? Over recent years, Manchester waterways have been the focus of numerous police investigations after scores of young men have gone missing, only to be found later on drowned in the city's vast networks of canals and rivers. But despite hundreds of hours of police time and resources, bodies are still piling up, and we're still none of the wiser why. The number of people found in the water in Manchester seems to have spread right across the county and beyond, and is no longer just a problem here in the UK. But regardless of how many bodies have been found and where they've been located, a concrete reason for why this is happening is something that evades us all, and the focus seems to switch from that of the serial killer theory to accidental death back to the serial killer. Now, when I did the original documentary back in 2015, people in Manchester's gay village were genuinely scared.
I believe it's real. I think it's real as well. I won't be going too near the canal late at night anyway, I know that for sure.
And I think it is like worrying, because a lot of people come out here. Quite a few people live.
But, like I've already said, because the police released an official video statement saying there was no such serial killer, the story seems to have almost faded away.
One of these individuals has been interviewed. CPS have offered no charges because of the circumstances around it, and no prosecution has ensued. So there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever to support the story in the papers.
But are the police always right? As much as we rely on the police, they're only human, and there have been times when they have failed to investigate murders properly, which means some serial killers can go on killing for years without actually being caught. Take Fred and Rose West and this BBC documentary that talks about missed chances by the police to stop the crime years earlier.
Tonight we show how an embarrassment of bungled investigations, missed opportunities and incompetence allowed Fred and Rosemary West to get away with...
The police were told about Fred 20 years earlier by longtime friend Terry Crick, and rumours of wrongdoings in the house on Cromwell Street were rife around local residents. Dr. Harold Shipman is said to have killed as many as 250 people between 1975 and 1998 before he was finally caught, despite the police investigating him previously where no evidence was found. And I suppose the most relevant serial killer case to this story is that of Stephen Port. Stephen Port was said to have met men for sex after he contacted his victims via online gay social networks. He then used a drug on them, GHB, before raping them and finally murdering his victims.
So did you have any involvement in the death of the male that we just spoke about a short while ago? Were you involved in administering any drugs or poisons or noxious substances to him?
No, I don't administer drugs to anyone or give drugs to anyone.
So obviously Anthony was found slumped outside your address with a large amount of GHB in his system.
The part of this that makes this so interesting is that on the original inquests into the deaths, they were all returned as open verdicts, much like most of the canal deaths here in Manchester. And even though the victims' families had raised concerns about a serial killer, the police denied any such person existed, much like here in Manchester. And it wasn't until the families started to investigate it themselves that the whole horrid affair came to light and Pulp was caught and sentenced to life. But let's look at the circumstances in which these young men actually go missing. They go on a night out with friends, and after a few hours of drinking they go outside the venue and disappear, only for their body to be found days later in the canal. One such case takes us back to 2004. In 2004, Chelsea won the league. DJ Casper was cha-cha sliding his way up the charts. Peppa the Pig entertained our kids for the first time. And a music style called Donk was smashing across the northwest dance floors, and the Southerners just didn't get it.
Put a donk on it.
But in the same year, a 21-year-old David Plunkett from Halifax travelled to Manchester with his best friend Michael Vittis to what was described as a mystery tour night out. In fact, it was a Budweiser promotional music event. A music event that would be held here at Daytona Racetrack in Trafford Park, which would ultimately be the last place that David would be seen alive. The event was to see 3,000 partygoers attend a night that offered free drinks in such quantity that David was eventually ejected from the premises by door staff after collapsing. And his friend, Michael, who said he was still inside the venue, said he remembered feeling annoyed and aggressive, whereas he was normally a happy drunk, which made him think that the drinks were spiked. David disappeared that night, only to be found behind the Imperial War Museum in the Manchester Ship Canal 2 weeks later. Now this is where the whole thing becomes a bit conflicting and questions come into play. When the case went to court, it was said that while David was stood outside the venue being sick, a bystander told the court David appeared to be very aggressive and asked for a fight. Yet another report from the door staff said he was laughing and saying what a great night he was having. The lad then shook our hands and said thank you. We left him there, having told him to get a taxi or find a way home. David's mother also claimed that her brother was the person who found David's phone upstream from the body, despite a police search. So, question is, what else did the police miss into the investigation of David's death? There is also the question of why did David walk away from the venue where he was supposed to be picked up by coach to go to the back of the Imperial War Museum. Now security also claimed that they ejected David at 12:30, but Michael states that he rang David's parents soon after that they were separated at 11:30. So, in the hour where Michael was separated from David, where was he and who was he with, and why can't Michael remember? Why is there no CCTV of the incident? Because surely a place like the Imperial War Museum or Daytona itself had cameras even back in 2004. The tests carried out on David's body showed that he drank 2 Southern Comforts, at least 5 glasses of wine and 3/4 of a pint. Yet Michael said David wasn't a big drinker, he never touched beer and rarely touched wine, but no drugs were found in his system. Yet according to a toxicology website, they state that the window of opportunity for finding drugs in the system on most occasions ranges from between 24 hours to 4 days, and David was found 2 weeks after he went missing. But I suppose the most important evidence of all is that of David's phone call, who rang his parents just before his disappearance. His parents said that he rang them in such a distressed state that he was screaming and howling down the phone as if he was being attacked. His parents then said that they rang the police and put the 2 handsets together so the police could hear what was going on, and then the phone went dead. It's then claimed that a former GMP officer who had took the call states that David had been in a distressed state during the calls with his parents, but they could not hear anything other than the son screaming. She added, I dealt with them for well over an hour trying to sort out assistance for them and him. The incident still haunts me to this day, and every death I see reported in the news, I become more and more convinced that all these are murders and not accidents. So here you have a young man that, according to his best friend, never touched beer and rarely touched wine, but yet these were two of the drinks that were found in his system according to the coroner's report. I mean, David basically had a licence that night to drink whatever he wanted, but yet you're still telling me that he decided to drink alcohol that he didn't like? I find it really unlikely and very suspicious, which brings me back to the Southern Comforts. So you got to ask, were the Southern Comforts spiked and then someone was buying drinks for him unknowing to them that they were drinks that he didn't like, but because of his state it just didn't register? There's also conflicting evidence of how David was acting that night, how he was 1 minute happy and then other people were reporting he was aggressive, which again would suggest that his drinks may have been spiked, despite the coroner saying that there was no drugs found in his system. See, there's also concerns about the toxicologist report, which said it may have excluded drugs such as ecstasy and Rohypnol, which would make you think they would be the first drugs that you would look for in a death related to a music event. So what else have they missed? Whether it be Manchester, Bristol or Yorkshire, people are still dying, and the notion that something just isn't quite right with the deaths seems to be playing on people's minds. Story after story, death after death, the numbers are rising and there seems to be no slowing down. Now, one person who has been following the case is that of university lecturer Joe Shorrocks. I asked him how concerned he was for his students and what his thoughts were on the whole thing.
Obviously, as a university lecturer, it is concerning for me. I see and know a lot of students from my own university, and I do know that they enjoy the nightlife in Manchester. I wouldn't like to walk down those canals at night, especially not on my own. I would never do it on my own, purely because, again, a lot of them are quiet, poor lit, and a lot of them are quite desolate in many respects. If I was to fall in, or they were to fall in, and there was no one around, there's not a great chance that they'll be able to get themselves out, I think. And that's concerning.
One tragic accident that did occur was that of student Charlie Pulp. 19-year-old Charlie had come to Manchester to study from his hometown near Newcastle and had been on a night out with friends when he left the venue in order to walk home. It's said that Charlie then tried to cross the lock over the canal, slipped and fell in. I spoke to Charlie's dad about the recent loss of his son.
He was a lovely kid, really different, really individual, a real leader, and kids followed him, and they just all loved him, and some fantastic stories are coming out about him,
I asked Nick how he and his family found out about Charlie's death and what were the circumstances behind it.
One of his best mates from Newcastle, because we live in Newcastle, called us on about 2 o'clock on the Thursday. He'd been out on the Wednesday night. We knew he was going out, and the kids were worried because they got separated after the night out and Charlie hadn't come back, and they weren't sure where he'd got to, so they were just calling us to see if we'd heard from him, which obviously we hadn't, From what we can tell, and who really knows, but went out like a lot of kids do, had a great time, good night out. Went for a wander, and looks like he's tried to cross the lock as a shortcut to get to somewhere, and it was lethal. I mean, it's lethal down there at the best of times, but that week it was snow and ice. It was this beast from the east weather, and he's obviously just slipped and gone through the ice and gone in.
I continued to ask Nick how he felt now and what the future held for him and his family.
Oh, just devastated, just complete massive void in your life, But the one thing, and my reason I'm doing things like this is, we've got to stop it happening to other kids. So I've got a purpose, and if that's what it took, that's what it took. We've just got to protect people, not just kids, everybody, these canals are lethal. We've got 2 other kids, he's got an older brother, a younger sister, and we've got to be strong for them as well. But we've got to do this for Charlie as well, and make sure that, something good comes out of this. And, Sunday Times did a report on Sunday, 76 deaths in 10 years, 76. I mean, that's just ludicrous. No civilised society can do that.
I went with Nick to the location of his son's death, where he was also met by the ITV News. As you can see, Nick is now being interviewed by ITV. It's strange for me to be so close to someone who's actually been affected by a canal death, especially after I've researched it so much, and I've obviously trawled these canals through the years looking for a pusher. However, I do think on this occasion Charlie's death is an accident. He's tried to cross the lock, and unfortunately due to the weather conditions at the time, he's fallen in. It was at this point when I heard that there was a meeting involving certain influential people in regards to Charlie's death, but what I heard after really did concern me. Now, I've just been listening to the interview and I've actually heard that there's a meeting today regarding all this with the police and the councillors, etc. And from what I can gather, Nick is actually being kept out of it, which really does surprise you since it's his son. What the reason is, we don't know, but I think he is going to try and find out where this meeting is so he can attend. Now, this wasn't the first time that I was told this was going to happen, after I spoke to a local lady from Manchester who was so moved by Charlie's death that she decided to campaign on his behalf to get some sort of barriers near the canal.
Well, we've got so much support, which has been quite overwhelming really. I'm working closely with Nick Pope, Charlie's father. We're just going to take it as far as possible until something's done and some barriers are actually put up. There is supposed to be a meeting that's held tomorrow. Now, Pat Carney, and he actually said this on BBC Radio Manchester, his words were that there will be a big meeting next Tuesday that will involve himself, Greater Manchester Fire Service, Greater Manchester Police and the Canal and River Trust. Now, me and Mr Pope wanted to go to this meeting. Mr Pope was adamant that he wanted to go to this meeting because Pat Carney told me that details of his son's death were going to be discussed. Pat Carney told me that he shouldn't be at the meeting and they'll be going through stuff that no parent should have to hear. Now, I said to Mr Pope that surely that would be his choice if he wanted to hear that stuff or not. Yeah. And I think for a parent that kind of information can bring a bit of closure as well.
We carried on chatting for a little while and then I asked what the police had actually said.
Just a little bit of what the police have said so far. They did ask Charlie's dad to give them permission to say it happened under no suspicious circumstances. I know that they have to do an inquiry now after anyone is found in the canals to rule out the pusher.
Now, just a mere mention of the word pusher made my ears prick up. However, I did ask if this was something that she believed in.
No. To me, it just doesn't add up.
So, on this occasion, it looks like Charlie's death was an unfortunate accident, although one that could have been avoided if barriers had been put in place. But even with such a tragic ending to such a young life, the pusher is still being mentioned, and that shows how the story has caught the public's attention and how it is still on people's minds every time a young man's body is found in a canal. If you've watched Curiosity before, you'll know that I normally put myself into situations that most people will find uncomfortable. Well, in this case, it's no different, and what I'm about to do is damn right stupid and very, very dangerous. But to know what is happening to these young men, I think I need to put myself into the same situation. And by that I mean get myself drunk and physically throw myself into the canal and then try and get out. This will at least give everyone a good idea of what is happening to these young men. Now obviously I'm going to have to put safeguards into place, and this is why I contacted a good friend of mine and fellow filmmaker Dale. So I rang him to try and talk him into getting involved, and after a bit of strong arm tactics on my part, he then rang me back a short time later and told me that he still thought I was mad, but because of the danger involved he had managed to get hold of 4 divers. So I grabbed my keys and wallet and bought a shed load of alcohol. Well, as you can see, I've now been shopping, and I don't know why I've bought as much as I have, because I'm not a big drinker, I'm a cheap date, 2 Lager Limes and I'm anybody's. However, I do think that I need to be absolutely plastered when I go into the canal. Because that way I can at least experience a little bit of what is actually happening. Now I know there's going to be a lot of people out there at the minute that are saying, well, that you're totally irresponsible. And to be honest, I totally agree with you. However, I'm a great believer in you can't talk about something until you've actually experienced it yourself, or at least experienced part of it yourself. So that's what I'm here to do. Now I'll just show you a little bit of what I've got. I've got a gin and tonic, not a drink that I've ever had, and I'm not sure what it's going to taste like, but yeah, I'll take that in a bit. Vodka, now we all know what that tastes like, and to be honest, that's enough to get me shit-faced on my own, okay? And 8 bottles of lager. Now, that is more than enough to get me pissed, and I know it's more than enough to get a lot of people pissed, so that is going to give me the true effect of what is actually happening, because I'm going to be mixing my drinks and shoving it down my neck as quick as I can. What is going to happen next is anyone's guess. Before I did anything, I needed to head over to Dale's to put the plan in motion and look up possible places and where to throw myself into the river with as little disruption to the public as possible. Dale has been a diver for over 14 years and he's dived all over the UK, throughout Europe and the rest of the world, and even led the expedition to save the first ever submarine. So I think I'm in safe hands. We spent the next few hours trying to find a location that was a vast stretch of water, out of the way, had a concrete side, and looked like the type of place that if a person fell in, they might drown. Once we managed to find that, Dale told me his thoughts.
So there are a number of dangers associated with what you're going to be doing. First thing is going to be the water temperature. This time of year, it's going to be cold. And you could easily catch hypothermia, so we will have a team of people standing by with a foil blanket just to make sure you don't catch hypothermia once you've been in. The other thing you need to think about is the fact that there are going to be sharp objects on the bottom that you could potentially injure yourself on. There will be shopping trolleys, you know, old murder weapons such as knives. A lot of murder weapons do get discarded in waterways and canals. It's an obvious choice for criminals to throw things in. With the actual Victorian design of a canal, and the Bridgewater is actually a Victorian design canal, it is actually shallow at the sides, and it goes into a bit of a V shape. So it kind of plateaus off at the start. If you stand up at the side of the canal, it's kind of waist height, and the further you go into the middle, it will actually slope down into a V shape. So the deepest part is actually going to be the middle. But the first thing is we need to send the divers in to do a sweep of the bottom just to make sure there's nothing going to be there when you go in. Like I say, it's not worth the risk of you falling onto something that you could potentially fatally injure yourself on. So we're going to make sure that's not there just to mitigate any further risk that could be there. The other thing you need to think about is there are going to be waterborne diseases in there. It is well documented that there are various diseases that can kill you in there. And there are other things as well, such as, you know, boats, rowing boats, motorboats, barges, things like that. So the team of divers and surface cover will mitigate any risk in terms of that. They will try and stop any boat traffic whilst you're actually falling in. So with everything I've said, there is going to be an added twist to this in the fact that you've told me you're going to be doing this drunk. And to be honest with you, mate, I think you're absolutely mental doing this drunk, because there are enough dangers and risks associated with what you're going to be doing. You know, without all the, you know, the diseases and the, you know, sharp objects and all the things that are on the bottom, all the risks associated with this, you're going to be paralytic when you're doing it. Now, I understand you want to recreate it as much as possible, but this is potentially life-threatening, and we need to be serious in the way we conduct the risk analysis to make sure this doesn't go wrong. The thing is, you don't drink a lot anyway, you know, you haven't got age on your side, and you've shown me the amount you're going to be drinking, and I think it is far too much. But at the end of the day, we're there to support you. We've got the team of divers, and we've got the safety equipment, and we just hope it all goes to plan.
So I had the divers, an extra cameraman, and of course a shitload of alcohol. What could go wrong? Now, the filming date for this bit of madness is still 3 weeks away, but in the meantime I still have 2 people lined up to interview, one being Nathan Tomlinson's mum. 21-year-old Nathan went missing after a night out in Manchester after a Christmas party in December 2010. The trainee sports teacher is said to have left the bar and headed out into the snowy winter weather in order to make his way home. But unfortunately, it was a journey that would never be completed, and Nathan went missing, only to be found in the River Irwell almost 2 months later. I then decided to try and speak to Nathan's mum via social media, and after her initial reluctance to get involved, she then sent me a message with some startling facts about the circumstances around Nathan's death. Now, I've just had a conversation with Nathan Tomlinson's mum over social media, and she's now agreed to a meeting. However, I'm going to show you exactly what she's sent me, and some of it is quite shocking. Most people think it was that simple, but it wasn't. I'll tell you now that Nathan did not drown because there was no water in his lungs. At the inquest, the pathologist said there was a possibility that Nathan was dead before being found in the river. It also said in the report that he was in the river for up to 7 weeks, despite him actually being missing for 8 weeks. She went on to say, "I have the post-mortem report and the discs of the inquest, but unfortunately I can't give you copies because I had to sign for them and could get in trouble." And this was followed up by, "You can ask questions at the inquest, and you can also get the post-mortem report from your son's doctor before the actual inquest, and not a lot of people know that. I did all this and GMP didn't like it. But this is how I found out that Nathan didn't have any water in his lungs, and a lot more information." I then asked if we could meet and see the documents, and she said, "I can let you see it in my presence, but I can't let you have a copy of it." I've organised a meeting with Nathan Tomlinson's mum, Tina. I'm just on my way to meet her now. She doesn't want to appear on camera yet. What I think she wants to do is just have a chat with me, basically feel out the situation, see what I'm like. So I'm on my way to meet her now. We've been talking over the internet for quite a few weeks now. She's very nervous about going on camera. She's done one documentary and she wasn't too happy with the outcome, I don't think. I don't think she got everything over that she wanted to say. And she's going to bring some documents to prove her son was murdered. Now whether that's true or not I don't know, and I won't know until I've seen the documents, obviously. So I'm just going to, not far away now, so we'll just see what happens. Well, I've arrived and fingers crossed Tina's going to be here, and hopefully that she's brought the documents that she said that she has, because that will prove that her son's death was suspicious, and obviously it will help the documentary and put the case forward that there actually is a serial killer or serial killers, if that is the case. Whether there actually is or not I don't know, but I'll go and speak to Tina. I'm not allowed to take a copy of any of these, unfortunately, because apparently she signed something that says that she's not allowed to distribute them or give anybody copies, and she said that was the reason she never gave Channel 4 any copies of it. So fingers crossed though, she's brought them, I can have a look at them, and then I can basically describe what I've seen to you. Okay? Right, unfortunately she hasn't turned up. I don't know what's happened, but I really don't know what to do now. This is the thing of doing a documentary. You know, people let you down all the time. They say they'll meet you, they say they have evidence, etc., and then they don't turn up. However, saying that, fingers crossed, you know, there will be a reason that she's not turned up, and we can maybe catch up on a later day. Right, I've just come home and I've had a message from Tina herself saying that she does apologise for not meeting me. She had a family emergency. However, she says she'll be available all week. Unfortunately, that was the last time I heard from Tina, and all correspondence between us stopped. This makes verifying Tina's story really hard, because without seeing any documents that she claims she has, I can't say 100% how true this actually is. But at the same time, I can't see any reason why she would lie about her son's death, because she most probably has more questions than anyone else. So at the end of the day, she might have just got cold feet and had second thoughts. But if what she said about Nathan's death is true, this has left me with more unanswered questions than anything else. With my failings to gather any evidence surrounding Nathan's death, I started looking at another case that I wasn't too sure about. A case that had refueled my interest in the Pusher story. 22-year-old Casper Blackburn from Salem, Manchester, had been out with friends at the Slug and Lettuce bar when he went missing in the early hours of October the 1st, 2017. By all accounts, Casper had been to a friend's house where he started drinking Jack Daniels and Coke before drinking vodka and whiskey once inside the venue. It's then said that he headed outside and then went missing and was found dead in the canal on October the 7th. Now, I'm not really sure what to think about this case, and people's initial response was to scream the pusher. And I have to admit that even I wondered how a young man could just leave a bar, walk off without telling anyone, go missing for 7 days, and then turn up dead. So I needed to have a look for myself. What you're watching has never been seen before and is what started the whole idea of this documentary off. This was actual live footage that I took after I visited the canal to see if there was anything that could point to where Casper was. And this was me doing my piece to camera. Now at this point Casper was still missing, and this was shot on day 4 of the search. As you can see behind me, you've got the police underwater search and rescue team who are looking for Casper Blackburn, who's a 22-year-old male who went missing early hours Sunday morning. Apparently he came outside with friends for a bit of a smoke and a bit of a drink. His friends had gone inside and then Casper had literally disappeared. Nobody has seen him since, and it is now Wednesday. Now, as far as I know, no other documentary involving the water deaths both here and the US, which I'll get to later, has ever caught a live investigation as it happens until now. But this just shows the lengths the police will go to in order to find a missing person. Now, just before I left, I was going to walk under the bridge and along the canal, but I got lazy because it had been a long day, so I shot this footage instead, pointing it under the bridge. However, if I had have walked down there, there's every chance that I would have found Casper, because this is where his body was found on day 7. I waited a few months before I revisited the area in order to check a few things like the depth of the water at the side of the canal, the location and how dark it actually was. Now this is me with a night vision camera walking the route that Casper would have taken that night, and as you can see when I turn the light off, it really is dark, but not pitch black that I couldn't see where I was going. But Casper was drunk that night. His actual words to his friend was, "I'm steaming." From here, it is unknown what happened due to there being a lack of lighting and CCTV. Well, round about this area, this is where Casper was found. I'm just going to check to see how deep it is. So it's not very deep. Just under 3 foot. Now obviously one thing that you will notice is the amount of boats that are moored on the side and the amount of foot traffic, water traffic, and obviously people on bikes. Obviously at that time of night it's not going to be busy, but it is making me wonder if somebody went in at that time in the morning, wouldn't the splash alert somebody? Because I would have thought it'd be really quiet, the sound would echo and somebody somewhere would have heard that splash. But just because this is where he was found, it doesn't mean that he actually fell in here, because the water current itself was heading back towards the bridge, which is the opposite way to where Casper was walking. Just to give you an idea of the actual location, here it is from above. Now as you can see, Casper left the Slug and Lettuce and walked down the towpath next to the canal. He's walked past the King's Ransom pub, which is situated on the left hand side across the water. He's then continued down the path and under the bridge and carries on walking along the path away from the bar. Now by all indications, Casper was trying to make his way home to his dad's house, as this was the direction he was walking. But what happened after that? Now anything from this point is pure guesswork, but there are a few questions regarding what was said. The inquest heard how he'd fallen off his stool earlier that night, but other friends said he appeared to be perfectly normal. Now going back to the David Plunkett case, could this mean that his drinks were spiked? Now his father also said that it would be unusual for him to walk home. So why on that night, in an early October when it's cold, wearing only a t-shirt, has he decided to do this? It also stated that tests showed that he was approximately twice the drink-drive limit, which isn't a great deal in the grand scale of things, and even a detective inspector said he appeared to be intoxicated, but there was no stumbling around. So why, after walking all that way on a straight canal towpath, has he all of a sudden fallen in and no one hear the splash, or him thrashing around trying to save himself, or even shouting for help, when there's a thriving boating community parked at this particular location? According to one theory regarding the water deaths, not only in Manchester but across the rest of the UK and the world, these young men are being abducted, held for an amount of time, tortured using water and then placed back in the canal at a later date. And this is the reason why these young men are often found weeks later, despite a police search already taking place. Now, one person who actually believes this is author and documentary filmmaker William Ramsey from the US. He has been studying similar cases in America after 2 retired New York detectives claim that the amount of water deaths around the country could be the work of a group of serial killers, after they found smiley faces painted near a number of the bodies. Thus the name, the Smiley Face Killers, was coined by the media.
Well, take a look at these faces. They're some of the more than 40 college-age men who mysteriously drowned, the tragedy spanning 25 cities and 11 states. 2 former NYPD police officers say that they are all murder victims linked to what they call the Smiley Face killings.
They say the cases they're studying date back actually to 1997, maybe even earlier. Now, in all, they've looked at more than 150 drownings in the U.S., which they call suspicious.
The murders, they say, are staged to look like drownings. Each has been ruled accidental. Case closed.
Jackie and Pat McNeil's oldest son, Patrick, was last seen in a New York City bar. His body found 50 days later.
It began after dozens of college students all across the country disappeared, only to be found dead, all of them supposedly accidentally drowning after a night on the town.
But William thinks that both the deaths in the US and the UK are linked. I spoke to him over the internet to see what he had to say. Now, we've been speaking in connection to the amount of water deaths here in Manchester in the US, which, to be honest, do have a lot of similarities. And I know that a lot of people in America have linked this to a group of serial killers who've been named the Smiley Death Killers, after a number of smiley faces were found near some of the bodies, if I'm quite right there.
Yes.
But just tell me, how bad is it at the minute?
It's really bad. It's still happening. People are still being found in water. They had just a CDC figure being found in water, which may not, it doesn't fit the profile exactly, but it fits the kind of body disappearance element of these cases. But there's still other cases that's still happening in Wisconsin. The chief researcher for my video or my documentary was a guy by the name of Jim Smith, who's still following these killings, and it's still happening. He's still posting and following up. There's actually a few in the UK as well, around Essex, Bristol, and I actually detail one of, I think, the type of perpetrator of these crimes in my documentary, a guy who lived in London.
Yeah, I presume you're speaking about Stephen Port?
Yes.
Now, just in relation to the deaths here in Manchester and those of the Smiley death killings in America, do you actually think that there is a link between the two?
There's definitely a link in MO. So the modus operandi of abduction of young men and them being found in water is definitely almost similar. Whether they're the same perpetrator, I couldn't tell you. But I do come to the conclusion in my documentary, my own personal conclusion, is that somehow through a fetish underground or through the internet, people have learned this technique of abduction and in some cases torture and murder and then dumping in
So
water.
do you think these people are being abducted and tortured using various methods, which could include things like waterboarding, which is used by the military to gain information?
Yes, I believe they're tortured. I believe they're abducted and tortured in, it might be a Stephen Port type case where they're kept for a short period of time, but I do think that they are, in instances, tortured. I think the first case here in the States was the guy by the name of Patrick McNeil out of New York, which was a hot spot. There are so many cases there in New York that you could write a book, about them. Boston as well, Wisconsin, Minnesota, definitely Manchester, Bristol.
So this is not just the US and Manchester that we're talking about, it's actually further afield. How far are we actually talking?
There have been body dumps in the Sydney Harbor for decades. So that's another big city. That was something that I haven't researched in total. There was another one in Thunder Bay in Canada with a lot of cases.
So what percentage of these deaths are murders, and how many are actually accidents?
Oh, I think all the ones that I detailed in my documentary are killings. I do believe that there are accidents, but the ones where the young men disappear for a long period of time and their bodies aren't found, and then found in a body of water that had been previously searched, I think are the giveaway. Those are the ones that I believe are abducted and killed.
All right, let me ask you this. Why do you think that the police are saying that none of these deaths are done by a serial killer? Because over here in the UK and those over there in the US are both stating the same thing, are they not?
Yes, no doubt. I mean, the FBI wrote something that kind of washed away any type of criminal involvement in these cases. And, you know, I talked to an ex-FBI agent, his name was D'Souza, and he came up with a number of reasons why they don't want to divulge that these are killings. One is just simply they don't want to. It's much easier to say this was an accidental drowning, but the other is there's a lot of culpability, especially around college towns, where the colleges could, you know, be deemed unsafe, and the colleges want to keep their reputations and make sure the parents are willing to send their children to those schools. And there may be some involvement with law enforcement, so that may be another reason why these cases are not getting the attention. Also, the multi-jurisdictionality of the cases, I think, prevents or has prevented investigators from seeing blaring similarities in the cases. So I think that, you know, some people, there's been people, you've talked about Manchester. There was a girl by the name Elise Soper who wrote about the Boston drownings. There's a recent book about drownings that took place in Minnesota and Wisconsin by a police officer. So they're seeing it from these little regions, but the totality of the cases that are happening even in France. People send me something about French cases of bodies being dumped in water. The totality of the worldwide phenomenon, I think, you have to, I mean, for me, it was very easy to come to that conclusion that something sinister is happening.
So, is there something sinister happening in relation to all these drownings? And could people actually be kidnapping and holding young men in order to get some sort of sexual kick? I mean, is there actually some sort of water fetish out there that involves drowning people for sexual pleasure? If there is, I suppose one place to find it is on the internet, and it wasn't long before I found out that there actually is some sort of fetishes relating to sexual arousal of water. And there's actually forums that feature this. One message I found said,
"I'm an 18-year-old girl who's funny, nice, and all that jazz."
All sounds legit, but then she follows up by saying,
"But what I've never told anyone is that I'm turned on by watching drowning or suffocation."
She then states,
"I know that this fetish isn't normal. Am I perverted? Am I going to be a serial killer?"
Now obviously, I don't know what happened after this, or even how true it was, but this was the start of a journey that made me look for more material in relation to this fetish, but I geared more towards the criminal side of things, and that's when I found this story. These four lovely ladies were dubbed the Angels of Death after being arrested for murder in the 1980s. Working as nurses' aides in Vienna, they decided to go on a killing spree that involved murdering 49 elderly patients in a 6-year period. But it's claimed that they may have been responsible for up to 200. What has this got to do with water deaths, I hear you ask? The method of killing involved holding a patient's head while pinching their nose, while another of the group poured water into the mouth until they drowned in the bed. They were only caught after they were overheard by a doctor in the pub bragging about their latest murder. But they all received sentences ranging from 15 years to life, but it's now claimed that they've all since been released with new identities. After finding this story, I went on the hunt for videos to see if I could find anything relating to sexual drowning. What you're watching is a group of videos showing the torture of women using water. Now I'm presuming that these are all roleplay, and the people who produced these videos have done this for their own sexual kicks. But I have no way of knowing this for certain because I only have short clips. But the problem I had with all this is that I couldn't find any videos relating to men being drowned, only women. Which sort of makes you question the whole kidnapping of young men theory to drown for sexual kicks. But that doesn't mean that it's not out there, and maybe I was just looking in the wrong place. The last time I made a video about the pusher, I asked the public their thoughts on the whole affair, and I thought it only right to do the same thing again. But unlike before, the results were a bit mixed. Have you ever heard of the Manchester pusher?
Manchester what?
The Manchester what? Manchester? No.
No.
No. No. Have you ever heard of the Manchester pusher?
Yeah. Yes.
What is it?
Don't know. Something about canals.
Do you believe the Manchester pusher?
Yeah. I just know that he pushes people in canals and stuff, like late at night when they're walking on their own.
Yeah, I just heard that it's some like murderer who like goes around Manchester and pushes people to like Deansgate Canal.
Just briefly, I've heard rumours about it, but never anything concrete or fact.
There's more people than just one person. There's got to be at the end
There's a couple of people pushing
There's got to be a few people. That's my opinion, isn't it?
Oh, I've read about it. Yeah. Is he not in the news?
Isn't it?
Yeah, there's one.
People pushing things in, man.
There's at least 4 or 5 people.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know why. Yeah, because the news tell. Yeah. Someone. Yeah. Is it not true?
Next time, I speak to another family who says their son's death in Manchester was no accident. Do you think somebody else is involved?
Yeah, absolutely.
See firsthand the devastation a water death causes. I visit the canals alone at night to see if I can find the elusive pusher. Not sure what's going to happen. I can't see very much far in front of me at the moment. Look at new claims and new deaths. Go on a march in Manchester. Well, this is the end of the march. Speak to some Americans and look at a similar situation in the US.
There was a boy from my area outside of Philadelphia who went out on Thanksgiving Eve and he never came home that night, went missing.
Plus, finally see what happens when I fall into a canal. The idea now is I'm just going to basically throw myself in and then see what happens from there.